Very good. Alright, so the only way to do well in your job interview, first of all, have you guys gotten to any interviews yet?
No. I have not.
None?
Except interview with, yeah.
What did they ask you?
It wasn't in depth.
Yeah.
She just wanted to know where I was coming from and why I wanted to be a CRA, and what we did in the class, what the class was all about. Because the class was all that was on my resume.
Yeah.
So she wanted to get a feel as to whether I could speak the language, at least somewhat.
Yeah.
And, you know.
So, to break it, it's, you know, as you can see from this report and probably from the stuff you did with Chris yesterday and Monday and Tuesday, it's just so many things that they could ask you. It's impossible to memorize all of it. You have to memorize concepts. Like, there's really only two important concepts in research, and they're related. It's patient safety and PI oversight. That's really it. And from that, I mean, patient safety is the number one. And PI oversight. But underneath these two categories, which are definitely related, you can even argue it's just one concept in this industry, and it's patient safety. But I want you to remember, like, PI oversight, because there's really nothing else more important than that in this industry. So everything you do as a CRA, like all the little things, you know, you can pick at random any one of those. It's related to one of these two things, all of it. So whenever you get stuck on something, you just come back to these concepts. You can go wrong. Okay? Now, they can ask you thousands of situations, and as a coordinator, they'll ask you the same thing. Coordinator, definitely as a CRA, but by the time you're ready to interview for CRA roles, having been a coordinator or having been something just underneath the CRA, like maybe an in-house CRA or regulatory affairs, trial master file is a really good position. Okay. You'll understand some of the concepts. Okay, so I'm going to pull up that report so I can look at it. But it doesn't make sense to memorize answers because it's really how you apply these two concepts to every question they ask you. And they're going to ask you situational based questions. If you remember from Shanae, when she went over the STAR. Do you guys know the STAR? STAR? I think she does week 8.
Okay. The situation, the
task,
action, and the response.
Yep, that's what they.
I don't remember.
Situation, task, action, and response. That's what they ask you in interviews.
Okay.
Okay, so any of these items on this report can be a situation. So the way a STAR interview is formatted is they will introduce the situation. Okay, so they're gonna say, what do you do when you go to a site and the PI, first of all, how do you know that the PI is fulfilling their obligation? How would you know as a CRA or even as a coordinator? You know, how would you know that that's the case? As a coordinator, they wouldn't really ask you that because the research clinic should already be aware of this issue. But as a CRA, they're definitely asking you that. As a coordinator, the clinic is going to be asking questions about how to maintain subjects in the study, how to answer queries, how to keep monitors happy, right? Like how do you handle informed consent? As a CRA, they can ask you about PI oversight. So this is a monitoring report that we use with the SCS. So how would you be able to determine if a PI is continuing to fulfill their obligations? First of all, what is a PI obligation?
He is responsible for the overall conduct of the study. He is primarily responsible.
Yeah.
He can delegate duties, but not responsibility. So the buck stops with him.
There you go.
Now, having said that, it's his responsibility to choose who does what.
Yes. And how? Yes. So delegation, right?
Yeah.
And how is the PI supposed to document the staff that they're delegating? How are they supposed to document oversight?
In the delegation log.
Yep. Okay, so you get the delegation log. And what else? You have other forms that are used to document PI oversight of their staff. So PI have to have oversight over everything, right? But from a regulatory perspective, and I think that's... So what are some of the regulatory documents in the reg binder that are used to document PI oversight of their staff? There's some forms. You said delegation log, that's one of them. There's another one that's important from an oversight perspective. Let's say I'm the PI, okay, and you guys are my coordinators. Okay, so I assign you to be coordinators. Okay, is that enough?
No.
You
have to know that I'm qualified.
Right. And
training log?
There you go. Training log. In research you gotta document it. Right? If I can say that anyone's the coordinator, but how do we have proof that I trained you? Right? How do we have, and then of course you have CVs and any other licenses the coordinator might have, which are what? There's other certificates that you guys have too. So there's a training log. That's for the protocol. Each specific protocol has its own training log. But what else? There's other certificates that the staff needs to have. Let's say you're the coordinator. What's a big one that you have to have? GCP. Yep. And then if you're gonna ship labs. Okay. Good. Okay. So those are the two that you guys already have. So that's one way. Another way is the CVs, right? And there's a bunch of regulatory documents which we'll get into, but this is just the topic of delegation and PI oversight of the staff. Okay. There's PI oversight of the patients, we're going to get into that as well. There's also other regulatory documents, we're going to get into that as well. But let's say I'm going to give you a star scenario now, okay? You're the CRA. You go to the site and there's been a protocol amendment since your last visit. What do you check for?
Changes that were made in the amendment.
Okay. Yeah, there's been an amendment.
So you compare to the last time you were there?
Yeah, so if there's been a protocol amendment, what do you check for as a CRA?
In the protocol amendment?
Yeah, what do you check for?
You check to see if it was approved.
Okay, that's good. You need an IRB approval. Yep. IRB approval. You need to make sure that the PI signed the protocol amendment signature page.
Okay.
But what about the staff? What do they do? If there's an amendment, what
the staff, like maybe you mean like if they have new staff or?
No, not new staff, same staff. But there's been an amendment.
They have to retrain them.
There you go. So you see, the concepts is training really for all this stuff. You cannot train and document enough. There's never been a case of a site over-documenting training. It's impossible. And by the way, you don't need to wait for an amendment to retrain. If I'm a PI, and I'm a good PI, and I notice that you're my coordinator, and you did something that I don't like, or that the protocol, maybe it's like a gray area, maybe you didn't even make a deviation, but maybe it's like it doesn't follow our SOP. I'm supposed to retrain you as the PI, or as a site director, or whatever I am, if I'm the QA person at the site, or if I'm like the owner, or especially if I'm the PI, I'm supposed to retrain you. Now, if I'm the PI, I can delegate someone to retrain staff, like a quality assurance, like Chris at the San Bernardino. He's delegated by the PIs to retrain staff. Whenever there's an amendment, they need that documented. So all staff, right? So the problem becomes, because you've seen these delegation logs, sometimes they include, well, not sometimes, always they include everybody who's involved with the study at all. Anybody, even the medical assistants. If you're drawing blood, you're on the delegation log. If you're a patient recruiter, you're on the delegation log. So whenever an amendment occurs, and by the way, they occur on average 3 or 4 times per study, that triggers not only Irb approval, you need the signature page, but it triggers everyone on the log to retrain under the new amendment. Okay, and in the reg binder, you should see in the training log, each time the protocol was amended, there should have been documented training for that. They can self-train, by the way. Like if you're a coordinator and it's in your site's SOPs to self-train, as long as it's documented. Okay.
Yeah, this is documented training.
See, amendment 2.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
there's probably other ones too on other forms.
Yeah.
So now, our question is...
So, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
It's okay that I don't see this. This is a training log?
Yes, this is a training log.
I don't see this next to the amendment.
That's okay. It just needs to be in the section. Every reg binder will be different.
Yeah, site training.
Okay.
Usually they'll have training, or it will be documented protocol training or something like that.
Yeah, because a number of things I saw here did not have any signatures on them. And I figured maybe they were just filing it for record purposes, not that when I get to the subjects.
Okay, which one?
I think either in the informed concept.
Oh, that's a template, yeah.
That's a template of.
So
that's a good one. So we didn't even get into that. Okay, so another thing that triggers when a protocol amendment, when a protocol gets amended, usually it triggers
an amendment to the informed consent.
That's right. That's right. Usually. Because if they're changing the protocol and it impacts what the patient previously thought the study was, and now it's like even a procedure is changed, the IRB may have the ICF amended. So you have to make sure that they have that in there too. The latest used version, right? The latest approved version. So there's infinite scenarios. There's another one right there, okay? You go to the site, there's been a protocol amendment. What do? We went through the training log, which is, I think, the most important. But now to get to patient safety, informed consent log, the latest approved informed consent needs to be used. And any subject who is still in the study needs to re-sign that, the newest version. So what do if you go to a site and the informed consent was amended, but you notice that none of the subjects signed, and they're still active in the study, but none of them signed the latest ICF. What do? What happens here? As a CRA, what happens? And then as a coordinator, what happens?
I'll talk to the coordinator why that happened first, and then have the patient come to resign the amended informed consent.
Yeah. So let's say you tell the coordinator and they say, oh, we forgot.
Well, I'll instruct them to make it happen.
I think that needs to be reported.
It's a
should it be?
No, it's not. I don't know if it's serious protocol temperature, but like, yeah. If the coordinator says, okay, we'll fix it, I think that'll be.
So if an FDA auditor comes years later and sees that a protocol ICF was amended, but the patients had a couple of visits until they signed the new one, you think that's gonna be
Yeah, it will definitely be. So that, I think it's a protocol deviation.
I think it should be reported. And it could be a big issue or not, depending on what the amendment was.
It's a deviation, for sure. And then it's also probably violation of the site's SOP. So the site would need to be retrained on their SOP. It probably should be reported to the IRB. The patient should continue. Usually they're allowed to continue in that case. I've never seen a case where sponsor says patients can't continue, but it needs to be documented why. And if it's a matter of the site forgot, what do you recommend as a CRA they do?
Retraining.
There you go. Yeah, that's good. Retrain. So you see, it always comes back to the same topic. No matter what it's about, it comes back to these two things. No matter what. Maybe I'm missing a third. I haven't found one yet. Because with these two things, you can explain everything. And really, it's just one. With everything else underneath it. But I put it in two because it's easier to remember regulatory this way. Because regulatory doesn't really affect patient safety too much. Until we get to the SUSARs, which we'll talk about later. So, if you get stuck in an interview, just remember these two things. And just come back to it. It's an easy way to get out of a hard question. Because no one can argue with you if you say patient safety. And PI oversight. You can say that about any of these items. 70 items. I can answer all of them with these two things. Any scenario. So that's good. So retraining of the SOP. Can the CRA retrain the site on anything?
No.
Yes.
Yes. CRA is allowed. So usually the CRA is not allowed to write on any reg docs. But there's two reg docs that the CRA is allowed to sign on. One is the training log, and the other is they have to do it. It's the site visit log. So every time the CRA comes in, they have to sign it. Right? Those are the two items where the CRA can actually write on. Okay. Now, you don't have to retrain, as a CRA, you don't have to retrain the site. That's the PI's job. But sometimes your lead will recommend, hey, you need to go retrain the site. They're having a lot of issues, especially with risk-based monitoring, like you saw yesterday in the SSV, they were talking about this. So if the site's having a lot of issues, they'll send the monitor specifically to retrain the site. And then while they're there, they'll do everything else too. But training is the most important to document. And the problem at these busy sites is they have like 10 or more studies going on at the same time. And every one of those studies is having an amendment at any given time. And they're not keeping up with the log. So it becomes the CRA's issue to do that, right? To get everyone there, or as many people as possible there, right? And so what do you do if let's say there's 6 people on the delegation log that you need to retrain, but only 4 of them are there for your visit?
I'll train the 4 of them and request the 2 to contact me later at my next visit.
That's an option, yeah. Or you recommend that the PI retrain them.
Retrain them.
As soon as possible. That'd be better. But if they don't, then yes, at your next visit you'll do it. So there'll be an action item that you'll leave for the site. Okay. So that's one of the ways to see if the PI has oversight is, are they doing all this stuff, or are you having to do it? Right. What do you do if you notice as a CRA that somebody's doing a procedure that they're not on the delegation log for that particular assessment.
Now, that would be a major protocol deviation.
Maybe.
Because you have to be trained in order to to carry out a specific procedure.
Well, let's say this person is on the log. They're on the log. Okay, but you know how each log has like A through Z assessments? So they're on the log, but they're doing one of the letters that they're not supposed to. So it could be major. So as a CRA, you have to find out first why. Did they just forget to put that letter? Or a bigger issue is...
a backup for the person.
Are they a backup? Or a bigger issue is, no, this person's never supposed to be doing that, but they're doing it. So you need to talk to the PI first to find out, is this person really delegated to do this? If so, we need to update the delegation log, and the PI, how would the PI update it?
By including, like, putting the current duty and the patient's name and signature and everything.
Yeah, putting the current letter, so let's say they're missing C from their assessments. The person can write C in there, and the PI needs to initial and lay entry. And
on their row.
You can do it there.
Okay.
Yeah. And you should probably have a note to file, like why, inadvertently this assessment was left off, but this person was trained during the same time everyone else was, and hopefully then you'll check the training log to make sure they actually were trained on that protocol, right?
Now, a note to file, that's usually written by the site, not
always,
not the CRA.
No.
So you will ask them to write a note to file.
You can recommend. I suggest you write a note to file. Why this person doesn't have this duty next to their name on the log. Right. Now you can't do it for the site, so if it's an action item, if by your next visit it's not done, it becomes a problem. And that's a serious. I've had that happen as a CRA myself. I had action items for 3 visits, same action item, and each time I come, I get new ones. So pretty soon the action item list is like 3 pages, like you see on the back of that one. Becomes 3 pages of action items. And what do you do if the site's not responding to the action items in time?
Talk to the PI?
Yep. Because it could be what?
A PI oversight issue.
It is.
They need to be retrained.
Retrained. Also, number 2, right? Does the site personnel have adequate time? So let's say the PI delegated to a coordinator like they do most things, but the coordinator has too much work. What would you do as a CRA in that case? Let's say the coordinator is good, they're there, they're trying, you can tell that they're busy, but they're not getting your action items done. What do you do as a CRA?
I'll speak with the PI.
Yep.
Recommend that they get a backup for the coordinator.
There you go. You get the strategies. Thank you. Just put it right there. You get this. Yeah. You give them strategies for how to improve that. So usually it's getting backup staff, right? The reason this is important is because if the coordinator may have already told the PI they're busy, but the PI maybe is not listening to the coordinator because they just think the coordinator likes to complain, right? So that's why it's important to hear it from CRA. Because now if you're saying the same thing, now the PI is like, oh, okay, maybe they were right. Right? That's why it's important.
Yeah.
Not only that, but you should document it in your report in case you ever get audited by the FDA. The FDA is looking at these things too. And if they see that the CRA never reported coordinator's workload, CRA believes coordinator
workload
has too much of a workload or doesn't have adequate time to fulfill their obligations. If you're not mentioning that in your report, then the FDA is gonna look at you like, well, you know, why did you do that? Why did you not? How come you never documented that? If that's obviously the case. Right?
So to come back to this form, one way to know if the personnel have enough time to carry out their functions, or that they don't, is when they're not responding to your queries.
Queries is
or action items.
That's another hint, yeah.
Okay.
Usually it's queries and action items.
Assuming they are, you know, maybe they like you and they respond to you, but they're still, you know, they have a lot on their plate.
The coordinator?
The staff.
Yeah.
How would you find out?
Happens to me all the time as a CRA with my sites. There's only one site that I go to where the coordinator is, I believe, just appropriately workload. Right? Because as a site owner, you want to keep your coordinators busy. But there's a level of being appropriate and then overworked. So when it affects quality, when it affects patient safety and PI oversight and all the action items, you know, anytime an action item is not done and a query is not answered, it reflects on the PI oversight. Right? So you need to remind, as a CRA, you need to remind the PI of that. And it happens to me all the time. Like the coordinators I know, they're not responding to my queries and action items, not because they hate me or they think I'm an idiot or they're lazy. It's not, usually that's not the case. Sometimes that is, but usually it's not. Usually it's, hey, I've got like 8 patients today. I don't have time for this today. You know, these patients want to go home. I haven't finished their visits yet. So that's when you know as a CRA, hey, you know, this coordinator is overworked. I need to talk to the PI before this becomes a big issue. Because if the coordinator's overworked, there's probably going to be deviations. When you're rushing, there's going to be mistakes. And those can affect
patient safety.
That's what you don't want. And that's your responsibility as a CRA to make sure that you prevent that. But it's challenging. You know, I mean, what if the PI doesn't have time to talk to you at your visit? What do? The coordinator is overworked and you want to tell the PI, but the PI is not there that day.
I'll leave a note. No.
Follow-up letter.
Yeah.
Now the follow-up letter goes to.
It could be email.
Goes to the PI.
You can send an email. Yeah. The follow-up letter is addressed to the PI, but you can CC the coordinator.
Okay.
Yeah. But what's a more immediate thing you can do?
Call.
Yes. Call. So. Put my card. Call. You can call the PI, like before you leave, and then you can still document that you had a conversation with them. Okay.
And if they didn't pick up the call, you put that you tried to call the PI, or you document it that you made an attempt.
If it's something that's that important, like you're noticing, and you'll notice probably before the PI will that the staff is overworked.
Okay.
Right? Because you'll be going to the sites at your first monitoring visit. So there's the site selection. Usually it's not the same CRA that's going to be the actual CRA. So you'll go at the SIV, which no one is really busy during those. There's no patient activity. There's no way to tell
what's going
workload, right? You can still tell, but it's harder to tell. Like, so then at your first IMV, after they randomize the patient, you'll go and you'll either find a bunch of deviations or you'll just find hints that workload could be an issue, right? And then you should suggest strategies to the PI. Like what are some, you mentioned some earlier about the extra staff, right?
Yeah.
That's one way to do it. What's another strategy you would give to the PI for staff workload? That's the big one.
That's the big one.
Maybe you notice that there's somebody else on the delegation log
That's
that is not doing anything, right? And you can find out why they're not doing anything. You know, maybe the PI has them on another study, which is great. But if there's an immediate need on your study, they should consider allocating those resources to this study. And they won't do that unless you tell them. Usually. Like usually if you don't tell them, the PI thinks everything is fine.
Yeah.
They don't know. Right? Because they're not really looking, even the best ones who have oversight, they're not looking at the EDC necessarily to see queries. And they might be reading the follow-up letters. Right? Or meeting with you at your visits and you giving them a rundown.
Okay.
But if it's not for you in the follow-up letters and in person, they're not going to know there's any problems, right? What do you do? So study facilities. What do you do if you go to a site and you realize that their equipment hasn't been calibrated or it's expired? Let's say the scales to weigh patients or the blood pressure cuffs. They haven't, the calibration is expired.
Let's say at the site initiation visit?
No, like let's say at an interim monitoring visit. So at your last visit, the scale, you didn't look at the scales. By your next one, you had more time, so you looked, and you noticed they were expired. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do, sir?
PI's coordinator to ask what's going on as usual because he's always on site. And then maybe if there's a site director or someone to talk to, then that's something should be done about it before my next visit. Like I'm like giving them the grace.
There you go.
And then if they don't do it, then you can report it. As
so there might be, sometimes there's no calibration sticker, but there's a log.
Okay. And
so you can have the equipment calibrated without a sticker. Okay, the sticker usually, they may or may not put a sticker on it when they calibrate, the vendor, right?
Okay.
But there should be a log of everything that's been calibrated. So maybe you ask the coordinator to provide that log for you.
If they are.
That could be your action item too. It's not an immediate need, but it could be an action item. But then what do you do if that hasn't been calibrated? If they say, yeah, you know, we forgot to get this calibrated. What do you do?
That's an issue.
Yep.
What did you say?
I said that's an issue.
That is an issue. There's issues everywhere.
So, would the sponsor be willing to, is that a common thing for the sponsor to provide?
They provide some equipment, yeah. But if the, let's say it's like a weighing scale, okay? And the site weighed 10 patients or 10 visits with this expired calibration. Is that data, I mean, what can happen there?
That's a problem.
Yep.
Okay, so,
so the question really becomes if that's a deviation or not. I don't think it's a deviation, but it's a kind of a bigger issue. You got to look into the site's SOPs. Okay. So what would you do at that if that happened with your site as a CRA?
Like the temperature depends. Is it? Will I work with the site SOPs or the?
You can ask to look at the SOPs. Yeah.
Or the SOPs of the trial we're doing, like the.
No.
Because.
That's a good question. So. Every site is supposed to have their own SOPs.
Yeah, yeah.
Your CRO will have its own, but your SOPs from a CRO are not for the sites to even see.
Okay, they are not for the site.
Yeah.
And
That's
what
just for
if
you.
the IP was meant to, like, it was really needed for the temperature, like she was mentioning yesterday.
Yeah, like
maybe
the excursion,
like a specific, temperature it's meant to be and stored and things like that.
Yeah.
Then that means it's working against the investigational product, because if there's no temperature log, there's nothing there.
Yeah. So what do you do? Because it could be a big issue, but as a CRA, your job is, you're really the first line of defense between the sponsor and the FDA. So if you catch it early, you know, in an audit, the FDA is not going to like that at all. But it'd be even worse if the CRA doesn't talk about it at all in the report. But there's no retraining again. Come back to this.
Yeah, training again.
Training, but on what? You can't train on the protocol. That has nothing to do with the protocol.
Yeah, you train on the site. I mean, we check
SOP.
like the site.
SOPs.
Yeah.
So in this case, you ask for the situation to be remedied immediately.
For something like that, I would call my lead CRA and ask her how I should handle this.
Okay.
If you can probably recommend, obviously, a retraining on the site's SOPs, but that's one thing you can't do because you're not trained on the site's SOPs.
Yeah.
That can only be the PI or a site director that retrains the site. You can recommend it, document it. Another thing that will probably lead to, if it's a repetitive issue, do you guys remember? I'll give you like bonus points if you know this. If a site's repeatedly making the same mistake, there's a form that the site needs to, there's a report that the site needs to send to the sponsor. It's not that common, but we'll talk about it.
There's a form they need to send to the sponsor.
The site needs to create a plan. So, plan.
Oh, okay.
Plan of action. So
yeah, there you go. You know. Corrective. Guessing. Corrective and preventative action plan.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the name of the form.
It's a report. There's no form. It's a report. The site has to make it.
That's the first time we'll be hearing that, actually.
But if you bring that up in an interview, you know, you'll sound like a pro.
Okay.
This is for when things like that are not protocol deviations that you can't retrain.
Corrective and preventive plan of action. Oh.
Yeah. Corrective and preventative action plan. I've had to write, I think I have to write like one of these a year, it seems like, for one of my sites. Which is not good. But you see how something like a calibration log has nothing to do with the protocol, but it does because it affects patient safety. Especially if it's like a blood pressure cuff, okay, and the patient has hypertension, but the cuff, because it's not calibrated, is not showing it. And so if the drug is believed to increase hypertension, but you're not recording that, directly impacts patient safety. So you got to look into the details at that point too. Is it just a temperature issue? That's another one. The drug might need to be quarantined, right? That's another potential star scenario. I don't know if Chris went over it. What do you do if you go to a site and you notice that there's been an IP temperature excursion? They talked about this yesterday, right? You guys should be experts on this. She gave you a 10-minute lecture on this.
Like when there's an IP.
She did. Yeah. Okay. She went on it for like maybe 5 minutes. She spent. She did talk about it.
Yeah, she did. I remember.
She said as long as the alarm, she does not need you to come over on weekends, but it should be documented that there were temperature excursion and corrected or something like that.
She wanted a refrigerator that will alert you.
Yeah, they said they already had an alarm, but she was like she wants, like that, the alarm is fine, but you were talking about some beep I don't know what, maybe to notify.
Notification.
Yeah, notification.
Yeah, but, okay, but so what? What if the temperature...
So it depends on how many excursions that if it's not a lot of excursions, it might not affect you.
It depends.
Yeah.
Right?
On the high peak.
But it's still a deviation.
Yeah, it's still deviation.
Even if it's 0.5 degrees over.
Yeah.
So as a CRA, what do you do if you go to the site and you notice
we check the range that we're giving on the SOPs from the sponsor to see the range it shouldn't pass.
Yeah.
To check if it's still good or we could trash the...
No, you don't trash.
No, not trash, but we could do we return to
you don't want to flush it down the toilet.
Yeah, if you can't give it to the subject anymore, in case the excursion was really above the limit that was given, probably you give it back to the sponsor or something. If it can't be used anymore. So
quarantine.
Quarantine, okay, that's good, quarantine.
You need to first of all, it's a deviation, no matter what. Next step, you find out if any patients took it. Okay. Next step, you call your lead, and you find out. You tell them exactly how much was at a range, when, for how long. They will let you know if it needs to be quarantined or not. Okay? Let's say it needs to be quarantined. Now what do you do?
So, to quarantine,
I think it's a site responsibility, right?
Yeah, but you gotta
inform the sponsor, and
they're informed already.
They are informed. Okay.
Now, thinking about what you're saying, I
think about this.
So it's quarantine.
Yeah.
I had something brewing in my head while you were talking.
What is that?
Tomorrow is another visit. The next day, 2 days before I come back.
There's some patients coming back.
Patients are coming back for a visit, and they will need the IP to be dispensed to them. And we can't ship another IP to the site unless even if I had a week, unless we know the refrigerator is going to be good enough for the storage. So, should we suspend study then at this point?
That's a good question. So, and not only the patients coming back the next day, but the patients already have in their possession right now expired quarantine medication. What does the site need to do? If the sponsor says, no, we can't have that, that should be quarantined.
Okay, so we'll recall.
The site needs to call every patient who has it and says stop taking it and bring it back.
Yeah.
Has to be documented. And you got to document in your report exactly which blister packs are affected. It's a lot of work, a lot of detail. Better it doesn't happen, right? That's a lot of paperwork.
Because it changes the whole timeline of the study. Because obviously, like you said, if the patient was meant to come in 2 days, and probably you might have to.
Well, those patients may not be allowed to continue in the study.
Oh, recruiting new patients maybe.
And those patients don't have a study anymore.
That's why it's a lot of work. It goes back to the square one.
They gotta come back. So what's the procedure to early term a patient?
Early termination?
Yeah. As a coordinator, you get methods. Let's say now you're the coordinator and the CRA said, hey, you gotta tell any patient who took this drug, they have to stop immediately and come in for a safety follow-up visit.
We'll call them. And if I'm able to reach out to all of them, good. Then if not, we'll leave messages like you make attempt to document that you make attempt. Like
how many?
3.
Okay.
Then.
And what else? One more thing you can do. One more thing you should do.
They provided addresses and maybe their relatives or loved ones' address. We can always reach them through that as well, or send out a mail.
There you go.
Yeah.
Certified mail.
Okay.
So they have to sign receipt.
After 3 calls?
3 calls and documented 3 calls and the certified mail. Okay. Now, anything you do above and beyond that is great, because you should get that drug back. But sometimes you won't be able to, right? And you have to just do what you can as far as documenting. And if that excursion occurred, probably need a kappa. And they probably need to be retrained on their SOP or revise their SOP. Maybe their SOP doesn't have anything about calibration log. What happens then? If you look through the SOP and there's nothing about calibration.
Then they have to amend it.
That's right. Because a retraining is not going to do anything. They have to amend it and revise it, right? So if you give answers like this, they're going to know that you know what you're talking about. And that impacts patient safety. What do you do if you go to a site and as a monitor and you notice that the site randomized the patient that should not have been randomized? Let's say they met one of the exclusion criteria, but the site still randomized them.
It's a protocol deviation.
So
the subject has to leave the study. Action should be taken.
Yeah,
How do you know they have to leave?
Okay, like to ask the coordinator.
If they meet an exclusion criteria, they shouldn't be in the study in the first place. So they should not continue with the study. But you talk with the coordinator or the PI. And
what if you talk to the PI and the PI says, "Oh, but in my opinion, that's not a problem. I think they should continue."
But it's a protocol deviation.
IRB might be informed.
And
but what if the PI tells you?
But you cannot inform the IRB.
Yeah, you have to inform the IRB.
Not
as a CRA.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
the site would have to.
CRA doesn't have communication with the IRB in regards to site issues.
Okay, so the CRA.
You have access to IRB documents, but you don't report anything to the IRB.
So who does the CRA like? Who is the person they answer to?
Your team lead.
Okay, so you're the team lead just between the FDA and the site.
The sponsor.
But let's say you tell the PI, hey, and the PI says, "Oh no, in my opinion, I think it's safe and they can continue."
Okay, I'll talk to my lead.
Yeah.
And say, how do we handle this situation? And it sounds to me like
fraud.
No. It may not be fraud.
No fraud.
Yeah.
Fraud is making up a patient. Like it doesn't exist, but I make one up.
Or making up a document.
Yeah.
Or
this is just what?
Oversight issue.
A lack of it, yeah. But the PI insists, no, I don't care, and the patient already took the drug and they're doing fine. As a matter of fact, they're doing very good. I don't want to take them out.
So the CRO or the sponsor might have to be informed
Get
about
involved.
this.
So who's the person at the CRO level that gets involved in these kind of issues? When they're medical issues.
Medical. You mean they have like a lawyer?
No, it cannot be the.
It's not a monitor.
Yeah.
It's
you're the monitor. It's a medical.
So it has to be a doctor.
Medical.
The expert.
No, let him say what
the expert. No, he's trying to use it, so I'm trying to.
The PI doesn't. He's like, you know what? I respect your opinion, Mrs. CRA, but I'm a doctor. I went to Yale. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I disagree with you. That's my patient.
Okay.
There's someone at the sponsor who's a peer.
Expert.
Yeah, and they're called a medical.
You don't know that.
Medical monitor.
Oh, really?
Medical monitor?
They have that?
Yeah.
In the IRB?
No, not IRB.
With the sponsor.
CRO.
Okay.
That's what, so they're usually a doctor.
Okay, so
actually, they're always a doctor. Okay? And you always are usually a same specialist as the study.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a psych study, your PI, he may not respect you, in your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's got a point.
Yeah.
Talk to the medical monitor, who's another psychiatrist, and the medical monitor says, well, you know, I have to check with the sponsor, but in my opinion, this is what the FDA is concerned about. They could give what's called a protocol waiver. Alright? What do you know about protocol waiver?
That's when
Chris tell you anything about that? No.
I just guess it's something, maybe something that was in the protocol, but due to some reasons, they just waived it. So they'll document it, like the reason why they are waiving it.
Usually it's for...
You've heard of the protocol waiver, right?
Yes, I saw it on the website.
Oh, okay, good.
So, but I think in that situation, it was talking about where, you know, for the safety or the well-being of the subject, you need to do something that's outside
the medical monitor.
Outside the study?
No, outside the requirements of the protocol. Yeah.
The medical monitor can get involved in the different aspects too, not just for waivers. So in this case, it would be, in this example, it would be a waiver for inclusion-exclusion criteria. Like, they take a lot of things into account. Because before doing a study, the sponsor always consults with the FDA on exactly what they want to see from the results. So if the FDA can say, hey, we're not going to approve this study with any waivers, no exceptions. Okay? They usually do that when there's a lot of drugs in that same category. Because the world doesn't need another erectile dysfunction drug. There's already 2. It doesn't need another high cholesterol drug, right? But for rare diseases, when there's nothing else out there, the FDA may tell the sponsor, we'll allow waivers within reason.
Okay.
And within these parameters, right? As long as X, Y, and Z will allow waivers. It's still deviation, but it's still reportable to the IRB. But in those cases, the patient might continue. But when the sponsors will let the sites know at the investigator meeting, we spoke to the FDA and they will not allow any waiver, 0 exceptions. When they're really strict, they'll let you know. They will always try to have you avoid waivers, because if they tell you waivers are okay, everyone's going to abuse it. Right? But when they say 0 exceptions, and they tell you why, usually they'll tell the CRAs too, as what's called a kickoff meeting for the CRA. Yeah. So usually like a day before or a week before the investigator meeting, when all the sites come, they will have an internal one with the CRO and the sponsor. So they'll train you guys on it too. And they'll say, hey, no, there won't be any waivers. Your sites may ask you, but you're not going to have any waivers for the study. Or they might. So it depends on the study, which is why I asked it, because there's many possible answers. And you'll notice in these interview questions, there's very rarely a right or wrong. It's just how you respond in these situations. And that's a perfect example. You can go many different directions, but all roads lead to the medical monitor in that case. Medical monitor.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember. We did, but I
think not we didn't use it as much because it's associated with the sponsor level.
Or CRO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But these things happen every day. I'm sure right now, somewhere some PI is arguing with the CRA right now.
Yeah, arguing.
I can almost promise you that.
Wow.
Yeah. So, medical monitor come into play as well for the SAEs. So what do you know about SAEs?
Serious adverse events that happened during the study. Like the patient was sick like was rushed to the emergency room.
Yeah.
It has to be documented as an SAE.
So what's the difference between an SAE and an AE?
SAE is more serious apparently.
Yeah, but so how? How do you, what's...
AE is, I think, as a result of maybe the drug or not. AE is just, okay, that one.
Okay. Let me help.
Yeah.
SAEs would have to either result in death or be life-threatening or result in hospitalization or prolonged existing hospitalization.
Okay, yeah.
Whether related to drug or not.
Oh, yeah.
So if I'm in a study and I eat that sushi, okay, and I choke on my chopstick, and I have to be in the ER and hospitalized, obviously no one in their right mind would say it's related to the drug, but it's still SAE.
SAE.
And maybe it is. Maybe the drug has some weird thing to do with my, throat, and yeah. So you don't know.
Or your chopstick.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
That means if, what if, the patient is already healthy back in the next visit, but the patient still has to say all the things that happened from the previous visit, right?
SAE, and then versus AE, okay, and then versus
suicides.
Yeah. Do you know what that means?
Serious, unexpected, suspected. Suspected, unexpected, serious.
What? Suspected, unexpected, serious, adverse reactions.
Yeah.
So S, suspected. S in SAE, serious. Not the same. Right?
Yeah.
Is every SUSAR an SAE?
No.
So what's the difference? Which one? When do they become a SUSAR? When does a SAE become a SUSAR?
When it's not already expected, when it's not documented already, when it's an event that is unexpected.
Suspected.
This is the important letter.
Okay. I thought the unexpected was. Okay.
This is the most important in this acronym. SAE, have you guys seen an SAE form?
No. There was an
Let's see if there's a template of it.
There's an adverse event log there, but.
Yeah, there's an AE log, yep. There's an SAE log.
This SAE.
Okay. So let's look. There you go. There you go.
Yeah, this is the form.
Okay. So you see those boxes there in the middle?
Yeah, here.
Yeah, what does it say?
So death, life-threatening, hospitalization, which can be initial or prolonged.
What's the next column there?
Disability or permanent damage, congenital anomaly or birth defect, and other serious ones.
Yeah, what's the one next to it? This one,
outcome, recovering, resolving, recovered, resolved with sequel, recovered, resolved without, not recovered, not resolved, fatal, and unknown.
And then only the PI can determine if, in his or her opinion, on that form, only the PI can put in his or her opinion, is it related to the study drug or not? It could be yes, no, or unknown. Okay? But that's just the PI's opinion. But the site's required to send the initial SAE report to the sponsor, because who's going to read it on the other side? Who's going to receive that form from the sponsor?
On the medical monitor?
There you go. So this is where the medical monitor comes in again. Okay? So the site has an SAE, the PI fills out that form, the initial. There's also a follow-up form. Okay? So the follow-up is when it's resolved or if it's still ongoing based on the protocol, they have to send a follow-up. Okay? They have to follow up until it's resolved. So the PI's opinion, he could put anything on there. He can put whether he thinks it's related to the study drug or not. The medical monitor receives it, looks at the form, and also comes with his assessment. And there's usually a group that does this in pharmacovigilance. It's not just medical monitor, but the medical monitor is the main contact for this. They will then determine if the PI put possibly related and the medical monitor agrees, it becomes a suspected unexpected serious adverse reaction related to the study drug. If it's not, and again, every CRO and sponsor has their own process for determining what gets on the SUSARs. Sometimes any SAE goes on there regardless of causality, but sometimes it's just what's suspected to be related to the drug. So now where does this, when the site sends the initial and follow-up to the sponsor, the SAE report, the medical monitor gets it, they make their determination as well, and they send this form to who?
The PI.
No, the PI already knows.
And the sponsor already received it?
Yeah, the PI already knows because it's his SAE.
FDA.
Yes, but most importantly, remember...
Patient.
The patient.
IRB.
Yes, but...
To the patient.
The study is not occurring in a vacuum.
Okay.
That's just one site.
Okay, so to all the...
How many sites are in that study we did yesterday? Like 300?
105 in the US and...
Okay.
So, you think they should know about this too?
Okay, yes, so all the sites, okay.
Yeah.
That is why I was saying, you know, it's SUSA if it's not documented already.
But it's documented at the site level.
Okay, so other sites should be aware that this is suspected and they should watch out for that.
Because of this. Patient safety.
safety.
So if, let's say, at our site in San Bernardino, we do that study, and a patient gets hypertension and requires hospitalization. Okay? The PI is like, well, maybe it's related, I don't know. Medical monitor says, yeah, it's possible. They'll create a SUSAR report and send it to all the sites doing the study. Not just this study, all the sites doing any study with that drug. Okay? And those go in every site's reg binder, so that a site in Kansas, a PI gets the form and says, hey, this site, and he has to acknowledge he received it and file it. This site in San Bernardino had a patient hospitalized because of hypertension. I noticed yesterday one of my patients, their blood pressure was elevated too. Well, maybe before they would have just maybe dismissed that as a coincidence, but now they're going to look into it more. Maybe they'll bring that patient in to do a safety visit, and they can prevent an SAE. Okay?
Okay, so
that's the purpose of that. It all comes back to this.
So when you say they send it to everybody doing the study, if a different, let's say Roche, has a similar compound that they are testing, they want approved by the FDA, am I responsible?
No,
you're not responsible.
The same drug.
Yeah, it's the same drug basically, the same compound essentially.
No, they all.
It can't be because they have the IP
active, in it. Yeah, they all have an IP number and.
They have intellectual property on the molecule, so they can't be the exact same.
Okay.
It could be in the same class.
Yeah.
But they don't have to.
But I don't owe them the responsibility.
It's just your studies. When you do a study as a sponsor, you get what's called an IND, Investigation on New Drug Application. So any study that you're sponsoring that's using that IND needs to be notified. You don't care about competitors. When your study's over, if there's a competitor that's using a similar drug, they will have access to that data when it's open to the public. And they will have consultations with the FDA, and the FDA might tell them, you know, this sponsor was using this drug, and this is one of the things we were concerned about. So if your drug can not have those side effects, you're more likely to get approval by us.
Okay. At what phase do you apply for the IND?
Pre-phase 1. So.
Oh, really?
As soon as you start using it in human subjects, you need to get IND first.
Okay.
And as soon as you start shipping it across state lines.
Okay.
IND. Yeah. So that's the SUSAR thing. It took me like years to learn this. Because no one taught me this. I just kept hearing SUSAR, and I knew it was just a log of all the SAEs from all the sites.
That's what I thought it was. So if it's not on that log, it's a new one. It's SUSAR. That's how I saw it.
Yeah. So that's the difference between SAE and SUSAR. Not every SAE makes the SUSAR report, but for some sponsors, it's their policy to put every SAE on there. But not always. Okay? In studies like oncology, where there's a SAE every day, you're not going to put every single SAE on the SUSAR, right? You'll have too many reports to send out. It has to be suspected at that point. And when they don't know, they default towards being conservative. So they'll add it. And then the AE, right? That's another way to check if the site is documenting everything, right? So you guys know the EDC, right? The EDC. So everything is being logged, including AEs, right? Everything's being logged in the EDC from a study perspective, like any assessments, any AEs, any conmeds, anything, right? Now, every site's using the same EDC. The sponsor has access to all of it, and they keep metrics on all the sites. But they don't let the sites know. But they keep metrics on everything from how quickly sites answer queries in the EDC, right? You'll have like a average in the middle. You'll have some sites that answer queries very quickly, and some sites that take forever, and stuff in between, okay? So that's just one metric, queries. Do you think these sites that take the longest to answer queries are going to get awarded a new study?
No.
Chances are not.
Nope. So as a coordinator in your interviews, you can talk about metrics and how you answer queries. Quickly, you want to be here. At the worst case, you just want to be right here. Okay? You do not want to be these people. They're tracking everything. That's just queries. They track AEs too. Okay? Most sites record about this many AEs per subject. Your site only records a few or none, and these sites report way too many AEs. Again, you want to be here. In this case, you want to be here to here. It's better to over-report than under-report AEs as a site. If, let's say you're a CRA and you have 10 sites, okay? And they all have about the same amount of patients on average. And every site on average has about 2 AEs per subject, okay? This is just, you can see this because you're the monitor. You don't even need to look at graphs, you just know. And then one of your sites doesn't have any AEs. What do you suspect at that point?
They're not reporting enough.
And that goes back to?
Fear oversight, efficiency.
And they'll ask you in the interview, for a CRA especially, what do you do if you notice that your site's not recording AEs compared to your other sites? And maybe they didn't have any. Could be luck. But usually it's not the case. And this happened to me as a CRA too. I had a site not report any AEs.
So in this situation,
talk to the PI.
And if you determine that PI oversight is lacking, what do you do?
Retrain. Okay. You, as a CRA, document that you had these conversations. Right? You can retrain on how to report AEs. You can only do so much. You can't do the work for them.
No, yeah. Now with a report like this, okay, I mean, it will be in the comment section, I guess.
Yeah, comments. And by the way, in those comments, you never put I did, I spoke to. You always write in the third person, the CRA spoke to, the CRA discussed.
Like
you don't put I
said. Okay, I'll just put my position in.
Yeah, just in case you get a CRA job.
Why? Is it so hard
to get? Because you have a job already.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, remember?
Yeah.
You don't even need this. I'm just training you for myself at this point.
Okay.
That's right. But no, let's say you get hired. Some students get lucky and get hired as CRA, and then they're overwhelmed, and they look at all the modules to try to learn, and they call me, hey, what do I do here? And they're nervous, right?
I would be.
Of course, I would be too.
Yeah.
When I got my first CRA gig, I called Shanae. 2017, I became a CRA.
Okay.
I called Shanae. I'm like, hey, how am I supposed to write this? And she said, it's the CRA, never I did, is if I turn that in, and I got hired as a senior CRA.
Okay.
So I'm supposed to know this. So I don't want to be embarrassed and turn that in.
And you never worked at the CRA itself?
Not exactly. No.
I mean, it makes sense.
I would do QA, but
if you've been in the industry.
QA?
Like quality assurance. Oh. That's what you're going to have on your CV, QA. Because it applies to anything. Okay, it can apply to coordinator, site director, even regulatory.
Okay.
CRA too. That's like, a CRA does QA basically, but for the sponsor and for the CRO. You can do QA for a site. Chris does QA at San Bernardino.
Okay.
I'm supposed to do QA here, but usually it's Monica. But I'm supposed to. And when we get busy, I need to hire someone to do just that.
Okay.
QA is very good because you can do a lot of things with QA. So that's another thing about those reports. Just the CRA did. Irb approvals, protocol amendment, informed consent amendment. Here's a good one. Here's a really good one for you, coordinator, or you if you're going to do coordinator too. You're a coordinator now, okay? You're not a CRA. And you're interviewing for a coordinator position. Okay, so it's a site director, someone like Chris interviewing you. Okay. Hey, what happens when you're filing an informed consent for a subject, and you notice that they forgot to initial and date one of the pages, but the patient left already? It's the next day.
Well, I'll have to contact the patient back and tell them, and they'll have to come back in, and they'll put the date, because you can't backdate according to Chris. So they put the current date, but I'll put an explanation why that happened underneath. Like, I'll just write why.
Late entry.
Late entry, something like that, yeah.
That's the textbook answer, and that's very good.
Oh, okay.
That's a good answer.
It's not practical? Or?
It's practical. It's good. Okay. You can't go wrong with that answer. That's the right answer. Okay.
Can I say they should come do the informed consent all over again?
No, because that would be a deviation.
Yeah.
And then what do you do with the original form? You're going to throw it away?
Because that's the source document. Right?
Yeah, you can't do that. And then they're going to ask you, why did you do it twice?
Yeah. Yeah.
So your first answer is probably best.
Better. Okay.
And the site likes to hear that. Whoever's interviewing you will like to hear that. Okay. Now, What you don't want to say is, I'm going to tell the CRA.
About it?
Yeah. And one of my students did that in an interview. And they still got hired.
Okay.
But they asked her this exact, you're going to meet her. She's coming at 5.
Oh, she's the one.
We can embarrass her about that.
And she reported to the CRA that, oh, I forgot.
Well, she was asked, just like I asked you,
Uh-huh.
in a mock situation. And she said, oh, I would call the CRA right away.
Oh.
That doesn't solve it.
That's like you're reporting yourself to the police, like.
Yeah, but that doesn't rectify the situation. You're supposed to rectify it as a study coordinator.
Yeah.
Not only is it bad,
yeah,
but it doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
So your answer was much better. Okay. Very good. Ah, Stan will be happy. Would you have said the same thing, similar?
Actually, yes.
Yeah.
We went through it yesterday.
With Chris?
Yeah.
He brought up this exact same thing.
not that Cesar's situation. He just said whenever we see late entry or because when the document we verified, like we did the verification and there were some dates that were kind of like not corresponding and the same though. So the girl will write late entry or whatever. So it was explaining what does mean and things like that.
Now I'm going to put you on the spot. And there's no, there's only textbook answers, but then there's practical answers too.
Okay, so what's the practical answer?
That is practical for that one. I'm not going to tell you to backdate, but I know many sites that would just do
the correct date.
The real date?
Just the next time the patient comes, they would say, hey, just put it the same.
Okay.
But you don't want to necessarily say that in an interview because that shows that
you're,
that's not a good first impression.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's better than what the other one said about calling the CRA.
Yeah.
But now, okay, so late entry, that's perfect. Okay, that's exactly how you should do it. And note to file. And it probably would still be, I don't think it's a deviation. This is where you would have to look at the site SOP for the informed consent process. So, man, I'm sure Chris went over this. Some ICFs have the initial and date on every page, and some don't. Okay, sometimes the IRB wants initial and date at every page, but some don't have that. Now, based on the site's SOPs, if the site's SOPs say every page needs to be initial and dated, then they have to do it. So if you're a CRA and you discover that it's not, even if the IRB doesn't require it, if they're doing it for every patient and they missed one, they're not following their own SOPs.
Yeah.
That's a problem. Now, if they didn't have that in their SOP and they're not doing that, then it's not a problem, right? So it comes back to the site SOP.
Do I need to make sure the site SOPs is also being followed as well?
Yeah.
As a CRA?
Yeah.
Even if
as a coordinator.
Even if I don't work for the site? What if I work for a pharmaceutical company?
But the first thing they ask for at the SSV is your process of consent.
Okay.
They asked that yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll have that, and you should. I discovered that too when I was monitoring. My site doesn't put initial and date. Here we put initial and date on every page. At least I think. But at my sites that I'm monitoring at, they didn't do that. And I asked them to look at their SOP, and it's correct. They're correct.
Okay.
But if it was not in their SOP, if their SOP said date every page,
then that's it.
Then we got a problem. It's not necessarily protocol deviation, but it's maybe a kappa. And maybe they should consider amending their SOP to something that they will follow. Because if that's a finding when the FDA comes, if you're not following your own SOP, that's a finding. Even if it's not required by GCP, whatever you said you're doing, if it's in your SOP and you're not doing it, then they're going to look at what else are you not following. So that's the issue. So that's good for the ICF. When you meet Jackie later today, you can tell her. So as a coordinator, what do you do, Tolu, if recruitment is not going as scheduled?
As scheduled, like
you're not recruiting as many as you anticipated. as many patients.
Okay, I'll check our means of getting patients. Is the site function? Is it the site responsibility to get patient, right?
Yeah.
So I'll check the means. Maybe if it's true, like you said, Facebook ads or through whatever the doctor's database or whatever. I'll try to see what we can do to make get more patients. Because the more patients we get to screen, the more we're able to meet the enrollment. Enrollment target. I mean, something like that. Like if we want like 15 patients and we're not meeting, so we'll have to work on that. And what else can we do?
And you can pull from your, let's say you worked at many sites before, or you interned at sites, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe you interned at a site, and you've discovered something that works well at that site. You can share the strategy with the new site.
Oh, okay.
Now, as a CRA, what do you do if your site is not recruiting as they said? What do you do?
Well, I will.
And I was asked this in a job interview as a CRA.
Okay, I will discuss their recruitment strategies with the coordinator. I will look at their maybe materials, their advertising materials, and make recommendations. Maybe they should come to Dan to do some ads for them on
that's
Facebook.
A good answer.
YouTube?
No one ever said that. That's a great one. That's a great one. You're right. Yeah.
Does the sponsor give some kind of, do they sponsor your...
they help sometimes.
Okay, they help. Okay.
So, here's what I would do. There could be different reasons. You need to find the reason for why they're not recruiting. Again, time. Maybe they have the patients there, but the coordinators, it's the last thing they want is more patients. It happens at universities all the time.
Okay, like they already
have a waiting room full of patients. They don't want more.
Okay.
They don't want to screen more. Then you ask them as the CRA, why aren't you screening? And the coordinator tells you, you go screen them. I've got too many, right? But that's still a problem for you as the CRA. So you got to find out why. Is the coordinator overworked? Does the site not have the patients? Do they have them but they don't know how to get them? What's the reason?
What's the reason? Okay.
Okay. If they have them but don't have time, just like if the coordinator is overworked, you need to tell the PI, I think your medical assistant can be helpful here. I think your receptionist can pre-screen, right? Look for strategies. And again, the PI may not know. The PI might have 20 studies and he thinks he's busy. But in your study, there's 0 patients. He may not know. Oh yeah, maybe my receptionist can pre-screen. And then you can get patients that way, right? In the job interview, they'll like to hear you bring up strategies. If the issue is they don't have the patients, that's a bigger issue. Then you can recommend that they reach out to the sponsor for advertising help. Okay. Or if you're a CRA and you have other sites that are recruiting well, you can maybe, without giving the secrets, share strategies that may work for them that could possibly work for them, right? Like, hey, my site in Omaha does really good when they do support groups in their office every Thursday for patients with Alzheimer's. Maybe you can do something similar here in LA, right? Just giving strategies, but the first thing is to find out why. Because sometimes they don't need help recruiting. They have the patients, they just don't have the time or they don't want to recruit. That happens a lot at hospitals and universities, like Mount Sinai. Do you think those coordinators want more patients?
I doubt it.
No way. Especially now university is a non-profit. They don't want more money, they want to spend it. So those are the things you got to think about as a CRA and as a coordinator. So we talked about deviations, eligibility, i.e. criteria, You learned what a medical monitor is, which is unbelievable. Shanae never mentioned that?
She did.
Well, she must have, but it's on the website.
What website?
The Intralink.
Oh, Intralink. It is on the web, yeah. I know we talk about it in one of the modules, but see, that's why it's important you come and do it like this, because you can learn something, but you don't know the practical aspects of it. Like, SUSAR makes sense, right? Like, inclusion protocol waivers, that makes sense. And sometimes you need a decision right away. Temperature excursions, that's another medical monitor issue. They decide, okay, well, that's a safety issue, it should be quarantined, or no, that's okay. It's still a deviation, but they can continue. And the drug can still be used, doesn't need to be quarantined. That happened to Shanae a couple months ago.
So the medical monitor will make that decision?
They can, yeah. Every sponsored CRO is different, but they're qualified to do that. They're the doctor, and they're experts on that drug. Like, they know that investigator brochure that has everything known about that drug. They know, the medical monitor should know that entire thing and the science behind all aspects of it. So they're like really experts on that IP. That's why they have their position.
Okay.
The drug storage. So we talked about excursions. Chris told you about it being double locked and all that stuff.
Double locked?
Double locked?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
He did?
In the models.
I hope he did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Not yesterday.
Not yesterday.
No, we didn't get to.
Yeah.
I'll have Monica show you guys. Today or tomorrow. When can the blind be broken if a study is double blind? First of all, what does that even mean?
Double blind?
Yeah.
The person taking the drug does not know what is taken, and the person giving the drug does not know what is given. If it's the placebo or the active drug.
No,
like yesterday, the one.
The site and the subject.
Yeah. Like yesterday, the SSV you guys did. You know, there's only one person who's unblinded, and that's the nurse practitioner that's gonna administer the IP, right? But the staff doesn't know, the monitor doesn't know, the patient doesn't know. But when or can that blind ever be broken? There's one hint.
Patient safety, when it's affected, right?
When there is a serious adverse event.
Exactly.
If I remember very well, gets escalated, and you need to unblind it so that the investigators, for instance.
So if there's an SAE where the patient, first of all, the PI maybe stops giving the IP, okay, or if the patient cannot follow the protocol anymore because of their SAE, they're going to have an early term visit. But if they're in the hospital and the PI suspects it might be due to the drug, obviously they stop it, but then they can break the blind because maybe the ER staff needs to know whether they got placebo or not, because that can dictate the course of their treatment.
Yeah.
And so there's envelopes in the site that have the codes, okay, for which batch, and you can find out which batch is placebo and which one is not. So you'll look and you'll be able, but only the PI can do that. Okay. And you gotta look as a monitor if those envelopes are still sealed when you look at the IP. They should be sealed. They should never be broken unless
Yes.
Okay. So what other situation can it get broken apart from an SAE?
Only
an SAE, okay.
Yeah. As far as I know, yeah. And tomorrow we'll visit another site.
Okay.
We'll come. I'm gonna think if we come here first or after.
However you want.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. But we're gonna look at their, I've never met him either, but we're gonna, he wants me to look at his site to see how they do things, so we can like do a tour.
Okay.
Like a SSB.
Your friend, right?
He's not my friend. I don't really know him.
Oh, is he
no,
the
that's
person?
that's someone else.
This is someone else. Okay. He's just opening his site.
He has a site, but I've never met him, and he wants me to just stop by.
Oh, okay.
Well, he becomes your friend tomorrow.
Yeah.
Maybe. He's not today, though. Okay, so site monitoring visit log. We know what that is. Okay. Screening enrollment log. Okay. Protocol deviation log. Site signature and duties. 1572 updated. What do you do if there's a new staff member added to the 1572? That's a CRA.
They have to retrain. They have to train them, the new staff, and they have to inform the IRB there's a new person on board.
No, not necessarily the IRB unless it's a PI.
Oh, okay.
But if they do have to do delegation log, training log, what other forms? There's 1572 that's updated. What other regulatory?